No. It's a little bit. Hold it while you're talking. Thank you, Bob.
It's technology going backwards.
Yeah. We need to upgrade. All right, I'm going to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask us all to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thanks, Jerry. I'm going to ask for nominations to elect officers for the 2020 term. Do we have any nominations? Nominations for chair. May I ask for nomination? Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, First Selectwoman Kupchak. It is with great expectation for a successful upcoming year with our new Board of Selectmen and our newly formed Board of Finance that I nominate Mr. Jim Brown for chairman. Jim has served on our board for 10 years. While on this board, he has helped Fairfield weather some of the toughest issues it has seen in its history and has the bruises and the experiences to show for it. The last 6 of those 10 years, Jim has served as our vice chairman under Mr. Flynn. Jim and Tom worked together as our leadership, and we're grateful to have had them both. Given all these accolades, I'm proud to nominate Jim Brown to be our next Board of Finance chairman.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Thank you. Are there any other nominations? I will close the vote. All in favor, please raise your hands. All opposed? Abstentions? The motion carries unanimously. Congratulations, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Ms. First Select Woman. Thank you for being here. We'll have to get used to select woman, but we're glad to do so. And we look forward to working with you, I'm sure. Yep, your job's done.
Out of the fire.
Thank you. And before we continue, I just want to thank the board. Mr. DeWitt, Ms. LeClaire, thank you. And I want to thank our colleagues for a bipartisan vote. It's very much appreciated. So I'll have a couple more words to say in a few minutes, but right now we'll continue with nominations. And I would like a nomination for vice chair. Mrs. LeClaire?
He has served on the Budget Committee, Senior Tax Relief Committee, the Not-for-Profit Committee, the Committee to Set Selectmen Salaries, and the Purchasing Guidelines, to name a few. He is always ready to assist in any way he can. Chris is both a mechanical engineer and holds an MBA, so I'm sure he will play the role of vice chair very well.
Thank you, Mrs. LeClaire. Do I have a second? Thank you, Mr. Walsh.
I'd like to second the nomination of Chris DeWitt. Chris, I will say, I'm not going to add a lot since I'm the second, but has been doing a phenomenal job with me on senior tax relief. And as I mentioned last time, recently came up with some like 28 spreadsheet page thing that feeds into each other and whatever. I'm still checking the math on that, but I'll get back to you. So I'd like to put Chris's name as a second into nomination.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, we'll bring this to a vote. All in favor of Mr. Chris DeWitt being vice chair for the upcoming year, please raise your hand. All those opposed? Abstentions? It's unanimous. Congratulations, Mr. DeWitt. Okay, thank you. Now we'll take nominations for secretary. Can I have a nomination for secretary, please? Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to put the name of Mary Leclerc, our colleague, in as to be secretary. She served in that position for a number of years in good stead. Mary, as we all know, is a CPA, and she does accounting for a living. She's the head of our audit committee, which I know is doing a lot of work right now. I think along with yourself and I think Mr. Matola, are you? Yep. So some important work on that committee. And Mary, I also had the pleasure of working with her, and I think we will be bringing this up again to work on the fund balance committee. We said we were going to review that, so hopefully we can take that up in the next month or two. She's done a great job, and she's our elder stateswoman on this board, having been the longest serving. What has it been, Mayor? 18 years? 18 years. You know, you get less for murder, but whatever. You'd be paroled by now. But anyway, Mary, I'd be pleased if you'd serve as our secretary again. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Do I have a second? Seconded by Mr. Testani. Thank you. Are there any other nominations? Seeing none, all those in favor of Ms. Leclerc as secretary of our board, please raise your hand. Opposed? It is unanimous. Unanimous. Congratulations, Mary. Okay, thank you. Before we get to our agenda, we would like to recognize our most recent previous members that are all here, and thank you for being here. We want to thank you for your service to the board and to the town. We appreciate all your efforts and time over the years. So we brought some plaques for you. Mr. Mayor, thank you for not forgetting them. And we want to thank Ms. Jan Carpenter for getting them done and making sure Mr. Mayor did bring them with him. So we would like to recognize one at a time. First we'd like to recognize is Elizabeth Zezima, and the plaque says, "The Fairfield Board of Finance thanks and appreciates Elizabeth A. Zezima for her outstanding service as a member of the Board of Finance, December 3rd, 2019. No, we pitched in for more than a card. I would like to recognize Mr. David Becker, who has his children with him. And our plaque says, "The Fairfield Board of Finance thanks and appreciates David M. Becker for the 6 years of outstanding service as a member of the Board of Finance, December 3rd, 2019. Mr. Becker? And we would like to recognize Mr. Tom Flynn, who we know has spent 10 years as our chair, 14 years on the Board of Finance. He has absolutely raised the bar for the chair, which is just my luck to follow, Mr. Flynn. He just did a fantastic job leading our board. And we look forward to working with you, Tom, on the Board of Selectmen, and we appreciate Tom that he's willing to use his experience and expertise on the Board of Selectmen. So we have our plaque that states the Fairfield Board of Finance, which is to thank Thomas M. Flynn for his 14 years of outstanding contributions to the Board of Finance and his 10 years of impeccable service as its chairman, December 3rd, 2019. I hope not. Okay, thank you again. Now, before we move on to item number 4, if the board does not mind, I'd like to just say a couple words. So here we are, we're embarking on a new term with new members, a new board. However, we do have a very experienced board. We are going to have 3 former selectmen, a former member of the Board of Ed, former members of the RTM. We have a member that was a Board of Finance member for another town. We have, as we have said, people that have been on this board for a very long time, which brings a lot of experience, not to mention the professional experience that comes with this board, which is all good because the expectations are high. And it's important that we remember all that we have learned over the years. So here's an observation. Our town citizens are watching. We know that from the last election. And although our citizens expect good, high-quality services to be provided at the appropriate cost, they expect our board to be exceptional stewards of the towns and their money. So our board must continue to focus our efforts on balancing affordability with providing the appropriate quality services. And we can't have both, but it's always a challenge. It's not just about the appropriate funding levels, but it's about making sure we have appropriate controls and processes in place. So we'll also continue to provide sound financial management and advice. We'll ask the right questions, we'll press for good information, we'll collaborate with other town bodies, as well as the town and education administration. Our board, more than some, must balance the long-term financial stability of the town with pressing short-term financial needs and wants. It's our job to ensure the appropriate level of funding of long-term obligations, the appropriate level of fund balance, our AAA credit rating, and capital investments in the town assets. In addition, we look forward to the completion of the strategic plan, and we thank the committee that has worked so hard on that plan. These are long-term, not quick-fix solutions that will improve the town's mid to long-term financial position and assist us in balancing affordability with providing services. So in closing, I'm honored to be your chairman. I look forward to working with everyone on this board, as well as all public officials in town, on moving forward and maintaining and improving the financial position of the town. And we definitely look forward to working with our new Board of Selectmen, our first select woman, as well as the RTM. So thank you. Any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we will move to item number 4, to hear, consider, and approve the 2020 meeting schedule. And I'll turn this over to Mr. DeWitt. Mr. DeWitt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to Jen Carpenter, as usual, does a great job in coordinating all these dates. The calendar was in the backup package. A couple things of note. 4th meeting from the bottom, it says November 10th or 17th. Jen's just waiting for final confirmation of the Board of Ed, whether we have this room or not. The preference is always to have this room, so we'll lock that down, but you know, we've got 3/4 of a year to figure that out. And that's it. We've moved, our budget vote is going to be on April 2nd, and this year we confirmed with Ms. Gardner that the Board of Assessment Appeals, all the Board of Assessment Appeals numbers will be in 2 days prior. So she can take those numbers, have 24 hours to make sure that she's updated all her numbers, get us data so we have 24 hours to see it before we actually vote on it. And that was the only change from the original schedule that went out. That's it.
Okay, Mr. DeWitt, I just want to point out that in our audit committee, we noticed that we have a meeting on St. Patrick's Day. which we certainly do not want to have a meeting on St. Patrick's Day. But if you notice on the 18th, it's a public budget session potential snow day makeup. What do you think about moving the 17th meeting to the 18th? And I'll ask the board the same thing. If
I would think that we have 3 potential snow day makeups, unless we're having like a serious blizzard season. The chances of it being missing 3 meetings seems kind of remote, and I don't know how, I know Mr. DeWitt studied this more than I have, because I'm looking for the first time tonight, but maybe we should just make the meeting on the 18th, but not replace that makeup day. If we have to, at that point, we could just all vote to have another meeting. Yeah.
Okay, so you're in favor of moving the 17th to the 18th?
Yeah, but
knowing
not
that we have
replacing the
other
17th,
days?
just removing the 17th and changing the 18th to be a public budget session, not a
Yes.
makeup day.
Yes, very good.
So I make a motion to make that one amendment.
I'll second that motion.
Okay,
Sorry, I'll second that motion.
great. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay, we have that one change. Any, Mr. DeWitt?
No.
Okay, any other comments? I would like to point out that on March 28th is our Saturday meeting at 9:30 at the Fairfield Ludlow High School auditorium, and that's when we listen to public comment. Give people an opportunity to come in and speak to the board that can't make it on regular meetings. Okay, if there's no further comment, all those in favor of the Board of Finance 2020 meeting schedule as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, very good. Move,
I'll coordinate this with Ms. Carpenter.
okay, thank you, Mr. DeWitt. Moving on to item number 5, to hear a financial update of the inspections and potential remediation related to town, field, and playscape contaminated sites. And this is, in a sense, a review of the numbers and the spreadsheet that we discussed in our special meeting in October. But in our quarterly meeting, an update was asked for, and we do have 2 new members that were interested in taking a look at the spreadsheet and the numbers. So, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. I enjoy saying that word, Mr. Chair. To you. Yeah, so everything you just said is exactly correct. We're going to call up Brian Carey to go through this, but before I turn the meeting over to Brian, or the presentation over to Brian, the important points of this are $700,000 of this money has been spent, which is part of your handout, 774,526, spent or encumbered at least. And some of it we know will be spent, some of it may or not be spent. So this is, and there may be other sites that end up, the final 21 that were tested that may be added to this list. So it's important to note that the list is partially certain, partially fluid. And with that, I'll turn it over to discuss those attributes to Mr. Carey.
Good evening, Brian Carey, Conservation Director, Interim Public Works Director for the town of Fairfield. So back in October, I came here and gave you some estimated costs. You have 2 sheets in front of you. One is what has been encumbered to date for all the work that's been done since August, and that is ongoing, which is that number that Mr. Mayor just talked about. It was $774,000. And then there's the other sheet, which continues to be estimated costs, which are sites that we are evaluating for additional investigation and/or remediation at this time. Some of these sites are scheduled for remediation. They're having remedial action plans developed, and some of them still require further evaluation and investigation before a remedial action plan can be developed. The timing on all of these is dependent on not only the consultant, but some of these are Board of Ed sites, so they have the authority. they have the authority to make the decisions about when and how those sites get remediated. I can answer any questions about anything on this list or anything else you kind of have about process or status or whatever.
Great, thank you, Mr. Carey. Ms. Marmion?
Thank you. So I understand this list for remediation is somewhat fluid. I see that the Osborne Hill parking area, for example, was added. There was something else, the Stratfield Road tree project removal. Is that missing from here, or
So
should
that
be added?
so that may or may not require remediation. We're still evaluating that. That is why it's not on this sheet. Whether or not that's town materials, we're looking at that. There's a bunch of issues related to that particular site, and the LEP, Time Bond, is still kind of evaluating that with the health department, and that has not been added because we have not determined whether or not that site needs remediation by the town at this point.
So I guess, again, this is all fluid, and then there are other sites that are still being looked at. Could you just give us a sense of those, the number of those sites, and where we are in the process of looking at those sites or testing those sites?
Yeah, so the Time Bond, there is a list of 21 additional sites that require additional investigation, and they're about a third of the way through that list. I didn't bring all that information. It's all on the website about what sites there are. You know, they're still getting data back from some of the sites they have tested, that some of the sites they still need to test, and some of the sites need additional investigation. We're trying to, as soon as we get the information internally, review it, have a meeting with the LEP, the health department, and the new administration, try to get that information out with weekly updates and put it on the website as soon as we can. And then basically talk with the LEP, and when we know that there's remediation that will likely be required, I've been adding it back onto this list. There's been a couple sites where the Board of Ed has looked at it and basically said, you know, it's under the recreational standard. They felt didn't need remediation based on the Department of Health's guidance documents. It's come off of this, but again, it is very fluid. So I'm trying to kind of provide best estimates based off of the information that's been being provided to me. Some of the sites that are in the process of remediation, like Burroughs, has been completed. So you see that on the encumbered list. I'm just waiting for the final scale tickets. It's all been backfilled. I should have a final number on that. I'm hoping it's a little bit under, but again, the bid with Red Technology was based off of a tonnage weight. So until I get the final scale tickets from the disposal facility and match that up, they can't pull a final invoice for me. But based on the information they provided, I should have that in a day or so. Gould Manor is still in process. It's about 80% done. When they've been going to backfill and collect confirmatory samples, they have been finding areas with arsenic that it's not really associated with the Julian fill material that you know, was deposited directly adjacent to the sidewalk where they backfilled it. As they've been basically collecting confirmatory samples, they've found arsenic kind of creeping out towards the pond a little bit. The exact nature and reason for the arsenic being there, I don't know. I mean, we're thinking maybe it's historic pesticide use in the park itself from the town dating back to the 70s. I don't know. It's not from a spill source. I mean, it's surficial. It just, I don't know what the reason is. And talking with the LEP, they don't really know. I mean, back in the 70s, lead arsenate was something that was readily used, not just by towns, but also by, you know, agricultural to spray, anything from gypsy moth to apple orchards and things like that. So, we have levels that are above residential standards, and, since it's been discovered, we'll remediate it to, back down to RSR levels.
So I guess, thank you for that update. I guess this is still a moving target. I mean, we really don't have a good picture of what the total cost might be, right?
That is absolutely true. I think this is going to be a moving target for a while until we continue to kind of get through all of these sites, investigate them, and try to get our hands around the extent of the contamination, whether it be fill-related or not fill-related. A lot of these properties historically, prior to the town acquiring them, were farms or, they're urbanized sites. People don't want to think that, it's urbanized, but it is urbanized next to 95 or, next to a road or in the parking lot. So there are impacts from urbanization, meaning asphalt or just atmospheric deposition, things like that, that can have issues. So areas, we're seeing areas where fill has been used, we're having low levels, and then areas where there's no fill, we'll find certain levels of contaminants. And trying to pinpoint that to one source or another, especially in case of Gould Manor, is very hard, if not impossible. We've looked at historical records, aerial photography to try to figure out, was this an orchard back in the 30s or something like that. So we are going through that level of detail on each site to try to, nail that down. So, again, it is fluid. I do think, as many sites that we test will clear, there will be sites that will need remediation, whether they're, necessarily fill-related or not.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Mottola?
So you kind of touched on some of this with some of your answers, and I'm not going to hold you to this, but if you're looking at this list here, to the best of your knowledge, what's related to the fill pile? To the best of your knowledge, and I understand that could certainly change.
Ultimately, obviously Gould Manor along the sidewalk that had asbestos, Burroughs Road, again, the reports were that, they filled around the areas of the goalkeepers. There was asbestos tiling in there, so, I would say that would most likely be related to the fill pile. Mill Hill Elementary School, there's asphalt in the soil underneath that sidewalk. There's millings. So that, we have tickets that obviously bring that back to the fill pile. Jennings School, the areas that were reported to have had fill material used were within the soccer field area. That all tested, below standards, or was able to statistically now analyze it using 95. I'd have to look at the data again, but most of the arsenic we found is directly adjacent to the playground. So the reasoning is that that's most likely associated with the arsenic in the treated wood timbers. Osborne Hill parking area, I don't know. There's no real record of Julian Fill being backfilled along the curb lines there. They did do a parking lot replacement project a couple of years ago. I can't say for sure on that one. Jennings Beach Playground, again, there's records of Julian fill or material from the fill pile going to backfill a water line that comes basically from a water meter out to a water fountain. And areas along there, there's arsenic, and then there's pHs everywhere. But if you look at aerial photography in the area where you're finding a lot of that, it was formerly a parking lot that was kind of topsoiled over and seeded in that area. And everyone knows the Jennings parking lot. If you go down there, it's kind of rubbleizing in its own kind of manner. So I can't tell you if that's fill related or if that's some type of remnants from the former parking lot. Old Dam Road tennis bubble, again, you know, there's reports of fill being used back there. There's one hit of PCBs back there. There's some anecdotal, there's some information to say that back in the 80s or 90s, there may have been a transformer spill in that area. So could that be related to Julian? I don't know. It looks that way. Obviously, one of the main constituents of concern that we're, is from the fill pile is obviously PCBs. So, you know, whether or not that is from the fill pile itself, probably, but I don't know. The fill pile itself, the PCBs up there were Aerochlor 1250, not to get too technical, but they were Aerochlor 1254 and 1261. PCBs are basically divided into subcategories. Some PCBs, Aerochlors, are very specific to certain industries, and then there's others that are very broadly used in waste oils or transformer oils. The PCBs that we were finding of the dumping material up at the fill pile were of 1254, which is something that is broadly used. It's not, you know, a 1289 or 1219 where I'd be able to say it's there, it's from that site. So it's very hard to tell. But it doesn't matter. We're still going to go back in there and remediate it. That needs a little bit further investigation. And then McKinley School, Time Bond is going out there to do further investigation on that site. There's construction debris in the fill material there. And there's some questions of whether or not that's part of this fill, or if there's some historic fill source on that property from a previous type of demolition project that may have been done. There's a question that was raised about that. Yeah, where they knock and basically, you know, turn the construction debris into aggregate to fill, which is not technically illegal if you remove all and make sure that all of the material that you're using as fill has been tested and deemed clean and is reduced into a construction aggregate and then used as backfill. But there are levels of, again, contaminants in there too. So that area needs to be further investigated. And then the last one, Ludlow Courtyard, so that's up to the Board of Ed. They're still trying to decide. There's a former, I guess there was a former oil tank in this area. There's a small exceedance of petroleum hydrocarbons out of 850 parts per million. The standard is 500 parts per million. It's not somewhere where the kids are located. It's on the western half of the school in a courtyard. I think they're talking about whether or not just to limit access by putting in a fence. There's existing HVAC equipment there right now. It's not somewhere where people generally go. So they need to kind of make that decision internally, whether or not they're going to pursue remediation or just kind of handle it by just preventing access to that area.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'll go to Mr. DeWitt.
Thank you. So is the encumbered list a subset of this big list of the 1.4?
Yes, so basically, yes.
Okay, I shouldn't add those two numbers together.
No,
Right, okay,
so
good.
the 1.4 at the bottom, total estimate, is including everything that's been encumbered to date. This is what I'm working off of. This is everything that's been basically approved and we're in process and working on.
Great. And then for Mr. Mayor, so this board allocated $800,000 initially. Use that until that's gone. Well, we're 25,000 and change away from breaching that number, right? So
Well, this board allocated $1.8 million, actually.
we
yeah.
dedicated 8 and then put 1 million
Well,
in
we
the
basically,
fund, right?
What the board used $4.5 million of the fiscal year ending 2019 positive variance to move forward to be used for the contamination that we knew about, any additional contamination, and any other known issues, and maybe future tax mitigation if the money was available for that in the future. The board placed $800,000 of those funds into non-recurring capital, and it replaced $3.7 million into the debt service fund, i.e. not in the general fund, but in the debt service fund. And of that 3.7, 1 million of it was specifically reserved for this project. Okay, and so, with the understanding that to take the money out, and this has been our practice, to use any of the $3.7 million, it has to come before this board for approval. And
But after we breach 800.
yeah, the 800 is in non-reoccurring.
Right.
Is
We can,
yeah.
we
So-
gave
so
carte blanche to spend the 800.
correct.
But when we hit $800,001, then we have to
right, so-
vote to
right,
pull out of the
right,
$1 million.
Right, so you'll see us probably, like January,
Well,
February.
that's what I'm saying, $26,000 isn't much.
Well, we haven't, that's not cash out the door yet.
Well, that was my next
Right.
question, right?
So-
So these
so-
are
so this-
encumbered. When, are we going to wait
Yeah.
till the bills equal
Yeah,
800?
when Brian and I will sit down and say, when do we need more money, how much more money, and we'll be coming before the board and asking for increments.
Great, all right, thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
First of all, Brian, Mr. Carey, thank you for your continued service running both departments. I'm sure this is quite still stressful on a daily basis, and I know anytime I've come to your department, you're always busy as the conservation director, so to take on the biggest department in town on top of this has got to be, I can't even imagine what it's like, but thank you for your work in that regard. So, as you just kind of went through this remediation site page, it is apparent that some of this is fill-related, and some of this is just, we're basically, in investigating some of the fill issues, we're finding other contamination. And it seems like some of it's arsenic-related, as you use the term treated wood timbers at some of these playgrounds, correct?
That's correct.
So, and we're going to be spending this money to do all contamination we find, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So the total estimated cost is 1.425 million. And I guess my question for you, and Mr. Mayor can weigh in as well, is with 21 sites still remaining, do you think we're going to be going over the $1.8 million?
Yes.
So do I. It seems like we're getting there pretty fast. But we just don't know how much, correct?
I don't know, and I mean, the thing is, even after investigation and you develop the remedial action plan, and we can do tonnage, until I get in the field and dig it out and get confirmation samples, I don't know what the final bills are going to be on some things. It's hard to estimate tonnage because we're digging it out. It's Gould Manor, we thought we had investigated pretty well. You know, there's a line between going out there on every site and spending all your money testing and all over to find out that you only have to dig out this size of table, or, you know, test enough to where you believe you have it delineated and then go out there, spend your money remediating it. But, you know, there's no great answer to that question when you're dealing with fill material. A lot of times, if it was an oil tank or a spill or a leak, I would be able to see the edges of the plume and say, yeah, you know, I know that this is the extent of it. But we're commingled with areas where there's fill, impacted fill, that, you know, we have invoices and records that say, yeah, this is Julian material, but then we kind of start digging over here and we're taking samples And now all of a sudden, we're finding, you know, historical contamination from I don't know what, you know. You know, a lot of the things that we're finding are inorganic materials, meaning they don't break down readily in the environment. So where they're coming from, you know, it doesn't matter. They need to be addressed. So, you know, I do think that, you know, as much as we investigate, you know, these additional 21 sites, there are sites that we're doing, and yes, we were able to immediately say this isn't an issue, and we can cross it off the list. But it's not as many as that we are hoping for. We are finding sites that may or may not be impacted with fill.
To add to that, you know, I think we test total, including the 21, it's like 63 sites?
Yeah, the total sites, I think it's almost in the 70s now.
Okay, now in the
including
70s.
21s.
So 70 sites, and most of the 21 are not tied to any Julian fill contaminants, or activity. So when you're anticipating, you can't extrapolate, like say it's 75 and this is 50 of them, and say, okay, that's another 50%, because this includes all the fills that were documented with Julian, and the remaining sites, most of which do not have any evidence of Julian activity. So we're hoping it should be less.
Have we spoken, either of you, this question is for, have we taken these lists to the employees of Public Works Department and had them say, do you think you guys delivered this stuff to any place else other than the documented ones? Because you keep using the word
Yes, yes.
documented.
Well,
So
yes,
I
we
want to know
have.
about
That's-
undocumented
That's
ones.
part of the documentation. Yeah, those interviews are part of the documentation.
My next question is in regards to the letter that Deep sent to the town, I think it was October 30th or 31st. Can you tell us what the impact of that is and whether that's going to be raising the costs for any type of remediation that needs to be done down at the town dump areas, the fill site, anything like that?
So I do believe, obviously, there'll be costs associated with that. What it is, I don't know. The administration is going to talk with the DEP about the NOV. The NOV that was issued to the town is so broad in scope that it's really even hard to respond to. So they're going to talk to the DEP with council in the near future. I'm not really privy to
It's
when that
scheduled
is going
tomorrow.
on. Okay. So it's going on tomorrow? I didn't know that. So, but yeah, I don't know. People have been calling my office regarding, the DEP being up at the pile. All I know is that they showed up with a search warrant. They were there for 4 days. It's obviously associated with the criminal case based on the search warrant. I don't know if the town's going to be privy to the information that is collected as part of that investigation. I'm sure, it will be released. We'll find what that says. I don't know.
So that's another source of potential increase of town cost, depending on what comes out, if they share their information, correct?
So the town's going to have to respond to the NOV that was issued, and basically it's so broad in scope that it needs to be kind of discussed with the DEP to see exactly what it is that they're requesting. Because again, it is so broad. They want investigation, capping, closure, monitoring wells. I don't know. I've read it numerous times, and I still don't know exactly. As a former consultant, I would not know how to put together a plan to address that NOV without having consultation with them.
Yeah, I've read it like 5 times myself, and I came to the same conclusion. Like, where do you even start with this? They seem to have all the information or holding the cards of stuff that they found or claim they found or saw in documentation or evidence that they're not giving us or whatever, and then you're supposed to respond and say, how are you going to clean up stuff we don't know where it is?
So all the numbers that are referenced in the NOV, because they reference very specific levels of PCBs. Those are all from data is available on the town website. Again, the administration is scheduled to meet with DEP. I'm sure that will shed some light on a direction that we need to take. Again, from day one, when I've been sitting up here back in August, when I said, I was trying to work to close that permit out, and whatever that process was going to be, we were trying to meet with the DEP and figure that out. And then the criminal case has been moving, and it just kind of went into a black hole, and there's, been no back and forth until we received this NOV in October. It actually came on my desk November 4th. And then, it was kind of an awkward time to get such a, since 2016 was the first violation that's been issued to the town, really on the pile itself. It's trying to get the new administration up to speed and then dealing with everything else that's going on. There's been a lot going on.
Mr. Mayor, to the extent we exceed this $1.8 million, what's the next source of funding that we have for this?
The next source would be the other 2.7.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it should be noted that even before the NOV, which we are not sure what it really means or what it needs to satisfy what it's asking, there was work that was going to have to be done there to cap that fill area or close it out one way or another. So it may be something we were already planning to do, and maybe something different. We just don't know yet.
Ms. Charlton had her hand up first, unless you have a, oh, go ahead, follow up.
So if we have to spend some more money, I know we have to do remediation, but is there such a sense of urgency that it has to be done right away, or is it something you could do over a year or two period so it's not such a financial hit to the town? Is that something that's possible or not a good idea?
The landfill itself?
I'm talking about not the landfill necessarily, the other sites if we have to do some remediation. Or does it really just depend?
No, I would say because of the interest of the public and the public health, that needs to be addressed as it's discovered. I mean, there's the perception of this, obviously, is what has been motivating us, to get this done as quickly as possible. Unfortunately, it's been since August, we're in December, and we have 3 sites under remediation. We have, upwards of 60 sites investigated, and everything's kind of, we're trying to be as fluid as possible as, new information becomes available, and address the concerns of the public as quickly as we can. And, we have the Board of Ed who's got their own kind of sites working and restrictions and things, and the town side. So, yeah, I think we're finally kind of getting our hands around it, but it's going to take a while before we're starting to chip these away. I mean, I'm hoping within a week or two, Jennings School will be done, then Gould Manor, and then we'll have 3 behind us, and we'll have to kind of keep just moving down the list that way.
Thank you, Mr. Mottola. Ms. Charlton?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of clarification on the $1,425,000. Have all the sites been tested yet? I mean, if I recall, there was the 21 priority sites, then there were the Board of Ed sites, including the playscapes, and then there was a list of supplemental sites. Have all those supplemental sites been tested at this point?
No, it's the supplemental, the additional list we're still working on. So I don't have the exact, I don't want to go through all of this, but there's probably there's more sites. Hoyden's Hill needs to be tested. There's probably another 10 or so sites that still are within that 21 that we still need to do.
Okay, so are the costs to test those sites included in the $1,425,000?
Yes. So everything, if you look at the encumbered, all the investigation and remediation, oversight, and everything that's ongoing is included that. So investigation is obvious, we determine which sites need investigation, and then we encumber the money for the investigation. They do the investigation, they develop a remedial action plan, and then we go to remediation and oversight. So right now, again, we have 3 sites that are, Burroughs is completed, Gould Manor is still in process, and Jennings is still in process.
So the $1,425,000 includes costs to test, but assumes that nothing will have to be remediated once that testing is completed.
The areas that are listed on this sheet that are spelled out per site, those are the ones that the cost, that 1.4 includes the cost to remediate those specific sites.
But those have all been tested thus far?
Yes, that's correct.
Right. So we're
Some of
just
those-
assuming the remainder that are tested, as far as these estimates go, we assume nothing, no remediation will be required, or nothing's been put aside for potential remediation?
That's correct. I don't know until, it could be, I don't know.
Understood. I'm just trying to get a sense of the risk in the number. And just a small point of confusion, the $774,000 is included in the 1425, but
That's
just trying to
correct.
follow the numbers, it looks like within the 774, there's roughly 300,000 or so that's designated for Gould Manor. And then if you go to this other schedule, it says 174,000. And that's because, is that because
So
the
there's
testing portion is down in that tie and bond number, or
There-
how does this work?
There's additional work that's going to need to be done there, and that money has not been encumbered into this schedule yet.
Sorry, the encumbered has more than the estimate.
Encumbered is $190,000.
Well,
There's a-
there's actually three, I see 80,000, I see 119.5, and then
Yeah.
I see 95.6. So I see it's roughly 295,000 showing as encumbered.
So the numbers, I'm sorry, I should explain this better, but the numbers that are estimated costs, that's strictly for remediation. So that's based on soil quantities and costs for disposal. So our bid is based on per ton, and then there's a quantity per ton. So when you're looking at the tie and bond under the encumbered, that's investigation and remediation oversight. That's not actual remediation costs. So when you see Red Technology and ACV, those are the remediation costs.
Understood. So this encumbered, if I see something labeled Gould Manor, it includes both testing and remediation, whereas on this schedule, the testing is that down in that $460,000 number?
That's correct.
Okay,
If you
gotcha.
total all of time bonds numbered under encumbered, that's basically adds up to this down here.
And just another question on some of these estimates, just in reading some of the reporting that's come out on this, it just seems like on the remediation that's been done so far, Gould Manor specifically, and then Jennings, we've done it, we've had to go back again, so it's been an iterative process, and it's turned out to be more expensive than anticipated. And understanding fully that these are all estimates, has that experience thus far kind of informed some of these remaining estimates here? Given that we've, we've estimated low because we just didn't know that additional problems would come up?
Yes, and I generally add 20% on when I'm doing the estimates. It's just in the case of Gould Manor, we are finding that much more soil not related to the fill. I do believe Burroughs Road will actually come in less than the estimate, though.
And just one more question, and Mr. Chairman or Bob, maybe a procedural question. With regard, and I'm following up on Mr. DeWitt's question with regard to the $800,000, should we be approving before something's encumbered? I mean, because once the money's spent, I mean, we have to pay the bill. So what's the right time to be approving the additional amounts beyond the $800,000? Would that be now to cover work that needs to be done before our next meeting?
No, that's what I tried to say earlier. what will happen is, it's a cash flow issue. The work is proceeding, work's being done, we know, and Brian and I will get together, we'll come before this board, as I indicated, and, you know, maybe next month and say, okay, here's what's happening, here's what we know, here's what we've done, here's what's the bills that are coming in, I need X number of dollars to pay them.
Understood. So my question was, at that point, we've committed as a town, right? So it seems like our approval at that point would just be a rubber stamp if the
Well,
work
you-
has been done, right? So
Well, you're not- you're not
774,000?
You're not approving that we remediate. I think the purpose of spending, in other words, I think the board and the town bodies, all the town bodies, have said we are going to remediate. We're going to inspect 70X sites. We're going to take out the fill, and we're going to put clean fill back in. I think that's been approved by everyone, if not certainly in substance. What the understanding of this board is, the board wants to know exactly what's going on, how the money is spent, and where it's spent. So it's more a recording and accountability thing rather than approval remediation thing.
If I may, okay.
Mr. DeWitt?
I think you're getting hung up on the word that I got hung up on, which is encumbered. Because encumbered means we're going to spend it, we just haven't spent it yet. And Mr. Carey said, I'm hoping these numbers come in lower. So that it's not really encumbered, right? It's almost like a not to exceed at this point. These numbers aren't actual numbers that we're planning to pay.
We're pretty positive that that 756 will be spent.
It's 774.
So the
756.
774 has not actually been incurred yet? It's just,
Just the way their process works, before we can do any work on any project, I put a requisition based on a proposal, bid, or any type of goods we want to purchase. I'll basically get a purchase order, which is like this. And then that will allow me to spend up into that amount. And then if I go into my Munis software, it shows basically encumbering the money against that account, so no one else can go in there and spend that money out of the account and basically draw it down, which you'll hear about in your audit coming up soon. But, so when I say encumbered, all of this money has been encumbered into purchase orders, meaning that it is tied up in the fiscal software in the town and cannot be taken out or spent by someone else. So I have this money sitting there ready to spend. Hopefully, in most cases, you encumber up to the proposal, and sometimes the remediation contractor says, well, we thought we had to dig 150 tons and we only had to dig 100, and here's your final bill, and I can close that purchase order, and that money goes back and can be spent for something else. But like you acknowledged, we've been a little bit off on some of our numbers, and we are seeing overages on some of the projects. Now, I'm hoping that as we go forward, we will put in a bigger, basically 20% on top of whatever we're estimating before we come back here and give you numbers that hopefully will come in under budget based on a contingency. I wasn't holding a lot of contingency in these numbers. And the other thing is, we're at the point now where, again, we're hoping to get our hands around this quickly, as we were trying to, and we've been rushing so quickly to address all this. If we get a little bit of breathing room and we can kind of plan it out a little further, then we'll try to nail the numbers down better for everyone.
Yeah, the board voted $1.8 million for remediation. It's just a matter of where the money was placed. If we end up going beyond the 1.8 million, that's where there has to be further, approval for spending on remediation.
no, thank you, I understand. My question was really just to make sure that there wasn't a process that had to happen that was holding up, money that needed to be spent because we'd be waiting for a vote, over the holidays or something. But
And one of the reasons.
this is not all spent yet, is what you're saying. We may be in contract for it, we may be committed to it, but it's going to take some time to complete the work that makes up this $774,000.
There's still a lot of work to be done under this, but I'm hoping to be done with all of the work by the first year on all of this.
Thank you.
And if there's work that needs to be done in Board of Ed sites, Osborne Hill, for instance, we're going to race to try to get that done so that we're able to mobilize over the winter break.
Yeah, it'll probably be an agenda item in January.
In January, to go above the 800? Yeah, to go above the 800. And to the extent when you guys know that we might be going over 1.8, you'll notify us and give us some schedule on why you think it's supposed to be, why it's
Correct,
getting
yeah.
above that.
Right, and one of the reasons that the estimates were inadequate is, initially, at least from my understanding, when we were first making these estimates, the fact that there's going to be a lot of, I don't know what to call it, historical or legacy contaminants wasn't part of our thought process. We thought we were only thinking about Julian, and that's turned out to be a big chunk of it.
Any other questions from the board? Mr. Testani?
Yeah, just a couple things. One, on Gould Manor, I know Mr. Charlton alluded to it, but I'm just curious. It seems like it's astronomical amount of money. I'm just curious, are we near the end? Are we at the end? Just wondering how much more has to be done to make sure that that field is completely remediated and safe.
So if you go out there now, you could kind of see it's in various stages, but the area that is currently fenced off, you can see the flags around the pine trees. There's an area of arsenic there, and it's sporadic throughout there. There's some low spots and then a high spot and low spot. So, I mean, unfortunately, we have to go in there and kind of dig all that out, and that's something I need to talk to the administration about before I tell the contractor to proceed. So I'm hoping, again, I wish I had, obviously weather's a factor, and it's kind of been a factor, but I'm hoping within the next 3 weeks that will be all buttoned up.
So in terms of financially, you're just, the answer is you're not sure?
No, we have it
Is that fair to say?
estimated, so that one area, the additional area that we're talking about is estimated about another 200 tons. So the whole project went out to bid for 400 tons, so we're looking at about 600 tons total.
And I just had a quick question on the, what you had indicated on the Ludlow Courtyard, on the oil tank. I just really curious on how, A, that was discovered, and B, could there be other oil tanks at other high schools? Is there an oil tank at Ward? Is there an oil tank at McKinley? How did we find out there was an oil tank where there could be contaminants, and could that be affecting other schools, I guess is my question.
So I'd have to talk to Angelus of Papa George about that. I mean, some of the schools have dual fuel, so most of them run on gas, and then they switch over to oil. The town basically replaces the oil tanks as they go out of service and age. So I don't know what the scope of that is at all the schools. This in particular, it was a Board of Ed site, so they were the Board of Ed was directing Ty and Bond, who was the town's consultant, to kind of test the areas that they felt needed to be tested. So I don't know specifically why they felt that area needed to be tested, whether it was a Julian issue or I don't know. I mean, I can get that answer for you, but.
Yeah, I mean, my concern would be, as I'm saying, why that particular, is there oil coming, near that oil tank? How is it contaminated? Why is it contaminated? And then, as I'm saying, are there other facilities, other schools, maybe, is this oil tank in the ground, I guess, would be
No,
one of my
so
questions. Is this
I-
above the ground?
No, it's just a historic remnant of whatever was there has been, from my understanding, was removed. And it was just, that hit was superficial. It wasn't something that's from an oil tank release per se. I think it was in the backfill when they backfilled the area for the tank itself, whether it was like asphalt in the fill material.
okay.
Yeah, so I don't think it was a result of the oil. I should have been more clear about that. I don't think it was a result of like an oil tank release. I will tell you, if we have oil tanks releases, they're not great, but that's a lot easier to deal with than
Right,
the
no, I
fill-
understand.
the
I just,
filled
you know,
that we're
I
dealing
mean,
with
you
now.
mentioned one, so I just
yeah.
would want to make sure that that's not
Yeah, it's
something
not.
else we need to be concerned about. that's
No,
all.
so generally, if we have most of the tanks we have for the schools are larger, and they all have monitoring systems on them. If we see those going down, then we know there's a release, and generally trigger a spill notification, and we'd go in there and dig it out very quickly.
Yeah, and if you could just double check that for us and just give us an update as to,
Not a problem.
you know, what the other schools report back to you, that'd be great. Don't want any, you know, unexpected additional oil tanks popping up or any other, you know, unexpected remediation costs. Obviously, that doesn't look as though that's connected to the fill pile, but still, it's, you know, a cost that we'd want to have addressed in terms of the remediation piece of it.
Mr. Matola, I think you can speak. to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I just, because I was on the Board of Ed, my recollection is that the board for, several years back, there's a concerted effort to get rid of all the old oil tanks. So we'd have to confirm that with the Board of Ed currently, but I think most of them have been dug up and eliminated, and if we have them, they're above-ground type ones now, not underneath anymore, so, right? Jim, do you
We've,
remember that?
over the last 15 years, the board has had a great program of trying to get all the oil tanks, I think they're all out of the ground. And if not, they've been monitoring the age of them and bringing them up as part of a program to remove them and put them above ground, whether if they have to find space inside. Some of the schools are so tight on their rooms that have the heating systems that they actually put them outside and fence them off. So I think that they're all gone. I mean, we were getting updated at the Board of Finance pretty regularly because we'd see each one coming out.
But then maybe we could get more
Yeah.
clarification of
Yeah,
why this
and-
is
and-
going
and-
to cost.
And Mr. Carey's made a great
15,000
point.
to-
Maybe it was fill material that they were concerned about that was put in when one was removed, because
Yeah,
they do
maybe.
fill
Yeah,
it,
that's
they
a
do
good
fill
point.
it with
Right,
things,
okay.
stuff.
Right.
What they call clean fill, but we know that that's can be
An
a misnomer.
oxymoron.
I will definitely report back on that, though, for sure.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Mr. DeWitt?
Oh, Mr. Mayor, you just made a statement about the fill pile, and you used the word cap. Are we going to have to cap? Was that literal, like really put a cap over some variant of the fill pile when this is all done?
That's obviously one of the options, but I'll let Mr. Carey answer the question.
I don't know. I mean, that's a real technical loaded question. It could depend on a whole host of issues of what's investigated in the pile itself.
So will there be maybe this is a stupid question, but will there be a pile after we're all done with this? Will there be some form of something that collects this waste going forward?
That collects which, you mean the millings?
Well, I mean, it's
and-
kind of the millings and stuff like that. What the intended purpose of the pile really was, will that still exist?
So I'm dealing with that right now, and something I previously dealt with in Stratford, and it's something that really every town in the state of Connecticut has to deal with. As historically, as we've closed all these landfills, it was like they're a huge credit card of just the liability of just taking millings and street sweepings and just putting them in the landfill. There's no costs associated with that to the town. But it also made you kind of lazy in the way you did things because you didn't recycle, construction material when you were generating that material. So very unwisely, the towns, and not just Fairfield, but all towns, just landfilled all this material. Not thinking, you know, at some point, that's going to be filled and closed, and we're going to be where we are now, where we're still generating this material, and now we have nowhere to kind of put it. Our waste streams are things that don't go away just because the fill pile has been eliminated. So we need to look at our waste streams and, you know, do a couple things. You know, catch basin cleanings and street sweeping is something that we have to do by permit. DEP wants us to you know, part of our MS4 permit for operating our stormwater system in town requires that we annually clean our catch basins and you know, basically, you know, sweep our streets. That material used to go up into the pile. We have to look at other areas where to bring that material now. It's being stockpiled currently in the yard. That material needs to be source separated and brought to facilities, whether it be a thermal disposal facility or a landfill. We have to look at those options. Again, millings is the same thing. We generate a lot of millings. All towns do. So does the state. There's not a good program for recycling a lot of this material, especially when oil is cheap. When oil is expensive, Tilcon and those companies are more willing to take it back and recycle it and put it back into asphalt. So we're basically at their whim, whether or not we bid that, you know, cost into our paving project, or we wait until Tilcon says, okay, we're willing to take that material back. Right now, you know, after the end of the paving season, the town put milling pile up at Lake Mohegan, and we don't have room to store that down at the yard right now. So I've had to go back and have that discussion with Tilcon and say, will you take that material for free? Which they will. Sometimes they'll charge you to backhaul it there. So we're now in the process of, you know, basically we'll be hauling that for the next couple weeks up to North Branford for disposal. But those are the things that we need to look at in all of our recycling methods to determine, you know, how are we going to operate without the, you know, that blank check that we had of just dumping all of the stuff up there, you know, and not thinking about it again.
So is it fair to say that after this is all done, right, the site where the fill pile is right now will either be moved away, all that material will be moved somewhere, or capped? I mean, those are really the only two options. Is that right? Because I hadn't heard about this cap thing. I mean, I kind of assumed there would always be something remaining there,
So when you
just
talk,
clean.
when you talk about a cap, I mean, that means a lot of different things depending on the degree to which it needs to be capped. I mean, there's RCRA law. That is not a RCRA landfill site at the present time. You know, that's part of the investigation that we need to do. Generally, municipal waste landfills are capped with an earthen cap, like the other landfill we have, that are our historic landfill. Yeah, well, Stratford landfill is a whole different, that's actually a National Superfund site that will need to be capped under a RCRA requirement, which means that it will literally be impervious to stormwater. So all of the water that were to hit that facility will need to be directed away from that facility and will not be able to be allowed to permeate through that material. So, I mean, I don't envision, and again, I've been burned on some of the things I said up here, but I don't envision at this point that it would raise to a RCRA-style level cap. You know, most of the, we would have to go through it and basically segregate material that would be, you know, that could be capped into a municipal-style landfill, and that areas of the landfill that may or may not exceed thresholds that could not be capped without RCRA level would be taken off-site and disposed of at a RCRA facility. None of the material that we've ever taken off of that site, even during the initial PCB dumping, when we found that initial dumping up at the site, was ever to the point where it needed to be disposed of at a RCRA level facility. RCRA means that it's being disposed of as a hazardous waste.
Okay. And none of that, what you're talking about, is in this $1.4 million estimate? Not even close, right?
No, and so the thing about that is we're just scratching the surface based on that NOV about what may or may not need to be done to satisfy the DEP based on the current status of that landfill. And I don't know the answer to that question because we, my attempts to reach out to them to discuss what the deficiencies in the permit documents that were submitted to them back in 2018 have just not, I haven't had any conversations with them about that. And I mean, again, I've said it before, and, I've had people, take apart what I've said up here and look at it. There's the permits that were provided to them at the time after the fact that work was done was improper. But again, it's not something that I haven't seen done in other municipalities or in instances where you're trying to close a solid waste facility in other parts of the state after the fact.
Mr. Walsh?
And both you and to Mr. Mayor, are we getting to the point like this coming budget year where we're actually going to have a budget line item in DPW for getting rid of certain types of contaminants from our streets, our sewers, or whatever? Because the way this was originally sold to us in the past was, well, we'd have to spend $400,000 or $500,000 to get rid of this. Now we could just mix it with this stuff, have this operation and mix it with, some clean fill, and then it goes away. And that didn't really work too well. So I guess the question is, and with all the costs that now is associated with it, are we going to be getting to the point where we're going to have a budget line item that we're expected to see in DPW's budget to get rid of some of this stuff?
So I'm currently working with Tilcon to kind of get an idea for the coming year with their bid.
On the
whether that-
millings?
Yeah, whether or not that's something that can just be incorporated into the cost going forward. Again, some years they'll charge you, some years they won't. So I do need to talk to them about as far as the other types of materials that we generate, concrete, brick, things like that. No, I think the best thing to do is bring in a company to reduce that material and then separate it and see what can be used, tested. And again, we have to do better on our recycling. It's something we need to look at in all stages of our real operations.
Mr. Testani?
Yeah, I'm just curious, you alluded to the state a few times, and, it seemed at the beginning of this debacle, for lack of a better word, the state was pretty engaged in, some of the initial town meetings. They had people come from the state DEP, address some concerns from some of the town residents. I know obviously you've referenced the letter. I just was curious if you've had the opportunity to either reach out to some of our state legislators to see if they could intervene on your behalf or the behalf of the town to the state DEP, or if there's someone within the DEP that, might be able to help alleviate some of these costs. I don't know if there's any grants that are possible to help alleviate some costs. I just was curious what the state might be able to do, because this obviously is sort of an anomaly here that, Fairfield's going through a little bit, and I just was curious what the state might be willing to do to help us.
So I don't know if the previous administration was talking to state delegation about, directly with the DEP. I mean, I think they were talking with the DEP administration. I think since it's been a criminal probe, there's been very little willingness on the part of the DEP to really discuss anything. I mean, from me, that I have not had much discussions with them from people I've worked for years. They're just like, I can't really deal with this right now. It's, we've been told not to deal with it. As far as whether there's funds available from the state, I don't know about that right now. I mean, this is kind of generally if there's brownfield money or those types of funds that are available for the state, they're available not for a problem of our kind of own making. And I don't mean that, our own making, but it is a town issue. And as much as the Julian issue has accelerated this, that even before all that additional fill was brought in there, that was still a uncapped solid waste landfill unit that dated back to the 50s. And at some point, regardless of everything that's happened, we would have to put together some type of closure plan to kind of close that facility out and put in monitoring wells like we did with the other solid waste landfill. You know, I think this is the lesser of the two known landfills. Everyone remembers driving up to the other landfill with their, you know, family and dumping all their stuff right on the ground. But the area where this was all done was kind of the burrow pit where the town used to burn all of the organic material, which, you know, under the regulations is still a solid waste landfill. And, I mean, if you go out there, and at one point we can go over kind of the history of that, but the pond that backs up to both of those landfills is where all that dirt came out to kind of cover the landfill on a daily basis. That's why all those ponds exist there. The town used to basically reach into the marsh, take up the sediments at the end of the day and cast that over the garbage so that, you know, it wouldn't blow away and the seagulls wouldn't drag it all over the place, and then they'd run over it and basically repeat that process on a daily basis. And that's how they dug out all the marsh down there. So, you know, the whole, not to get into it too much, but the whole public works area, if you go there, and, you know, that was built at the elevation of the marsh. So if you go there and you look and you realize that the grade is up here on all of these areas, well, that's on landfill, you know? So, you know, the whole thing is a landfill on the marsh. So there is not, you know, dating back to the 30s, 40s, 50s, and whenever that was started getting filled in the 30s, there's unsuitable material all throughout that.
Any further questions? Yeah,
That's what I'm thinking.
Happy holidays.
it's getting worse and worse. So how could we sum this up where we are right now?
So so this is, and again, I haven't had full sit down with the administration yet. It's just been crazy busy. And the bottom line is they're going up to the state to meet with the administration. There's actually an RFQ out on the purchasing website right now for environmental services. And if you look at that, it's very all-encumbering, even from the standpoint of this. You know, when we get through this, we'll have an RFQ out. So if there's additional sites coming in with the Julian fill material, we can actually go out and get proposals from numerous companies and kind of get back into the bid process, because this has been kind of an emergency, and we've done things off state bid list, and remediation has been done through normal bidding processes. But the RFQ will allow the town to basically shortlist a couple qualified environmental engineer consulting firms, put this problem, excuse me, put this problem in front of them and interview them for their expertise, excuse me, on handling the matter. You know, it's like basically like hiring a lawyer, you know, put the case in front of them and listen to them, how they're going to basically prepare that case for trial, because that is basically what we'll be doing.
All right, thank you, Mr. Carey. Any further questions? Seeing none? Yeah, thank you very much for the update.
Thank you, Brian.
Okay, moving on to item number 6, to hear, consider, and act upon any communications. Mr. Mayor, do we have any?
No communication, sir.
Mr. DeWitt?
So, Mr. Mayor, at the last meeting, we requested our open positions, which you sent to us. Thank you very much. I just wanted to, so last meeting, Ms. Bossy ran through our estimated increase to fund balance, which is nearly $4 million. But $1 million of that were vacancies. And I was looking at the list that you sent, and I'm thinking that we're probably not going to see most of this $1 million in vacancies. Only, well, I guess if we hire someone halfway through the year, I guess we'll see some of it, right? But a lot of these vacancies, 5 of them are tied to Public Works. But I had a couple questions. Do you even have the list in front of you? There are, hopefully, there are 3 ECC telecommunicators, and it says they were recent resignations. Was that based off of our move to SHU?
No.
Just completely different, okay. All right, well, I wanted to bring that just in front of our board because, again, that $1 million I wouldn't take that $1 million to the bank in vacancies.
The vacancy numbers is a calculation. It's basically a sum of 2 numbers. The first number is the dollars saved to date, okay? And the second number is the open positions to date times the salary or wage for the amount of time we anticipate that those positions will remain open. And the sum of those 2 numbers equals the vacancy number, which was like, a little like, it was like 1,050,000 or something.
So you're saying that $1 million is prorated based on an estimate of when, so for example, Director of Public Works, it's posted, we probably won't have someone till, let's just say, if we're lucky, January or whatever.
We hired,
Half of
we
the-
hired the superintendent this week.
I had heard that, that's good news.
Right.
But that director position, literally, there could be 6 months of non-pay, of savings, right?
Theoretically,
Right.
that's probably, that's a good example. That's probably in there at 6 months. So I anticipate we'll definitely have someone by.
Oh, so that $1 million maybe is more
Yeah, it's
realistic
a
than we
realistic,
thought.
yeah, I wouldn't give you unrealistic numbers, Chris.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Walsh?
Mr. Joe, can I borrow that form? So I had looked at this, Bob, thanks for sending it, and there seem to be a lot of resignations in the communications department. The ECC telecommunications, there's 1, 2, 3, which raises the question, who's answering the phones? I mean, you call 911, I mean, it's, there's that many of them? Others?
Yeah, there's at least one of them that just didn't pan out, and there was one that just couldn't
Okay.
deal. And yeah, it's not an easy job.
Yeah, so these are more recent openings?
Yeah, and
For
we're,
these-
yeah, and then we're basically, and we have one, I think, open, that's being held open for
Okay.
the regionalization, if that happens, doing overtime with it.
All right.
Billy, well, it's got to be voted on by everybody, but it should, we're down to the short strokes on that.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Just real quick, we meet again January 7th, looks like at Sherman Elementary. And at that time, we'll have a full board, and we'll take a look again at our committees, the 3 committees that are ongoing, audit, budget, and fund balance, and we'll assign members to those committees. Okay, so we'll think about which committee you want to be on, and we'll work to accommodate. Other than that,
Senior tax relief.
Ms. Marmion.
Yeah, could you just send us a list of those committees, perhaps, so that we can take a look at them?
We
Thank you.
can do that. Yes, thank you.
You're not getting off senior and disabled tax till we're done.
Okay, if there's,
I don't know when the parole board's meeting, but I got a feeling it's not for a long time, unfortunately.
okay. Can I have a motion to adjourn? That's Mr. Mottola, second Mr. DeWitt. Just before we go, happy holidays, everybody. Have a safe holiday. We'll see you in January. All those in favor? Opposed? Very good. Thank you.
And Merry Christmas, everyone.